name is Claire Redfield. We caught her trespassing in our Paris Lab facility 10 days ago. She apparently infiltrated the complex looking for her lost brother, Chris Redfield, one of the surviving members of RPD's famous STARS teams.
After the recent back-to-back successes of Resident Evil remakes, there was little doubt in anyone's mind that Capcom wasn't going to slow that train down anytime soon. The company itself confirmed last year that it had every intention to keep developing more Resident Evil remakes. And though we've yet to hear any official details on those plans, recent leaks have indicated that the company has already taken several steps to put those plans into practice. Interestingly enough, however, it doesn't look like Capcom has chosen the games for Resident Evil's next remakes that many would have deemed the likeliest candidates to be remade next. After having delivered remakes of Resident Evil 2, 3 in recent years, most would have expected that Capcom would stick with the series' numbered entries. The company had already skipped Code Veronica, which meant that the majority of series fans were confident that Resident Evil 5 would be the next remake. At the same time, many in the fanbase also felt that it was only a matter of time before Capcom went back and did another remake of Resident Evil 1.
What is this place?
Not quite your ordinary house, that's for sure.
Hey, Wesker, where's Chris?
According to recent leaks, however, neither of those two is being remade. As per prominent insider Dust Golem, Capcom is currently working on remakes of Resident Evil 0 and Resident Evil Code Veronica, which, as per the insider, are 2 among 5 Resident Evil games that are currently being worked on, Resident Evil 9 being another one. Other reliable sources like IGN and VGC's Andy Robinson have also corroborated Dust Golem's claims, which means it's looking more than likely at this point that the next remake we see from Resident Evil are going to be ones that not too many would have expected to see.
Let's just say that I'm a ghost, coming back to haunt your dear brother.
Wesker?
Obviously, 0 and Code Veronica aren't numbered games, while the two of them also don't enjoy the sort of universally glowing reputation that a lot of other previously remade Resident Evil games did. All of which is to say that Capcom likely would have viewed them as less financially attractive prospects than full-fledged numbered Resident Evil games, a notion that many would say has proven accurate when, after Resident Evil 3, Capcom ignored Code Veronica, even though it was what the series chronologically demanded. But as unlikely as remakes of 0 and Code Veronica would have seemed to many, especially at a point where Capcom does have other numbered Resident Evil games to turn to as options when deciding what to remake next, in my view, it's the best possible decision that Capcom could have made for Resident Evil and its fans at this point, and for multiple reasons.
Power is life.
Who are you?
It was I who scattered the T-virus in the mansion. Needless to say, I contaminated the train, too.
The biggest and most obvious of those reasons is the plain and simple fact that remakes of RE0 and Code Veronica are just much more interesting prospects than remakes of, say, RE1 and RE5. For starters, we've already had a remake of Resident Evil 1, and it was already an unabashed masterpiece. Sure, the remake itself is quite an old game at this point, and another take on the classic that reimagined it as a third-person game built in the RE engine does sound like a salivating prospect, but a remake of a game that has already received a pretty darn good remake in the past is inherently an idea with more than a little friction. Then you have Resident Evil 5, which doesn't feel like it's in need of a remake. Sure, the game is a decade and a half old at this point, but it doesn't feel that old. It doesn't have all the polish and gameplay improvements of modern RE games, and obviously its visuals and text have aged, as well as aspects of its story and writing, but all things considered, Resident Evil 5 is still a hell of an action game, especially if you're playing co-op. Could it be even better with a remake? Sure, but it wouldn't be the sort of exciting radical leap forward that gets you out of your seat. You know what would be that kind of leap? You guessed it, either 0 or Code Veronica. They would almost definitely get that sort of leap. Both of them are games from Resident Evil's fixed cameras era, which means their remakes are going to feel similar in the magnitude of their changes to the likes of Resident Evil 2 and 3. Visually, mechanically, narratively, and from a design perspective, Resident Evil 0 and Code Veronica's remakes are both going to look and feel significantly different than the originals, and that, in and of itself, makes them much more exciting than other potential RE remakes. And yes, both games are going to require significant reimagining because both of them have major issues in different areas that drag them down. Issues that Capcom will have to address as priorities if it wants the remakes to be received well. Resident Evil Zero's lack of item boxes and its character swapping mechanics led to some of the game's most frustrating aspects, while Code Veronica is notoriously poorly tuned with its resources, difficulty, and design, in addition to having an infamously off-rails and over-the-top story. Obviously, Capcom will have to keep a lot of those elements in place, otherwise, why even bother remaking these games, right? For instance, you can't imagine a Code Veronica without characters such as Steve or the Ashford twins, even if they weren't exactly the most universally beloved characters. And similarly, you can't imagine Resident Evil Zero without having players frequently switching between Rebecca and Billy. The company will, however, have to find a way to heavily rework and redesign those problematic elements. Characters will have to be entirely rewritten, performances will need to be complete new takes, mechanics and significant portions of the design will have to be entirely overhauled. Remakes of Resident Evil Zero and Code Veronica will likely be radical overhauls, a lot of which will simply be down to just plain necessity. And isn't that a much more interesting way to remake a game than the much more conservative approach Capcom undoubtedly would have taken with Resident Evil 5? And sure, an entirely new version of what the Spencer Mansion and its iconic horrifying hallways can look like is an alluring idea, to say the very least. But given the option, we'd much rather hold off on that and prioritize other remakes first. Sure enough, it seems like that's exactly what Capcom has done. There's absolutely no way that the company isn't eventually going to get remakes of Resident Evil 1 and 5, one way or another, and at some point in the future, both of those are absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, going to happen. But in holding those games back for now and deciding to go with Zero and Code Veronica first, not only has the company gone with the more creatively interesting picks that would give the developers much greater freedom in how they choose to recreate the source material, it also ensured that it isn't going to have to worry about having run out of games to remake anytime soon. Until then, we couldn't be more excited about the prospects of Resident Evil Zero and Code Veronica receiving the sort of remake treatment that other games in the franchise have enjoyed in recent years. Hey, did you know that we at Gaming Vault upload new videos every day? Stick around, drop a like, subscribe, and hit that bell, and let us know what kind of content you'd like to see in the future with a comment below.